Hello and welcome to the Manchester is Red podcast. My name is Steven Railston. I'm back again as your host today on this Monday morning after Manchester United won 2-0 on the South Coast on the final day of the season against Brighton. I was down at that game with Samuel. It was a 4 p.m. kickoff, but we're back and we're bright-eyed and bushy-tailed this morning, aren't we, Samuel? How are you?
We're trying to be, yeah, we're trying to be. The season is over for some, but for Manchester United, it never feels like it ends. It's always long seasons, but you want it to be longer. We want it to be longer with an FA Cup final to look forward to this weekend.
I was looking forward to a nice night's sleep, but for some reason, there was this guy in my car park next to my apartment, which is a private car park, getting out at 5 a.m. and screaming that he wanted to be let out. So I woke up because my window was open. I was thinking, who is this idiot? And I had to put my face mask back on and just try to get some 50 winks. So I didn't expect that. I didn't need that, Samuel, after a long drive down to Brighton. But here we go.
No,
Here we
no,
are,
you
anyways.
didn't. You didn't, did you, Alan
No,
Partridge? I mean, this is you are
no, it is a
Michael
football
from
pod.
Alan Partridge. In fairness,
Look, it's a football podcast. Let's talk about the football. 2-0 win. It was ending the season with a positive result, but it has basically been a joyless Premier League season, Samuel.
by and large, not entirely joyless. I mean, United have had. You think of the McTominay double, the McTominay rescue act in October against Brentford, Mainu's 97th minute winner against Wolves. There was another added time winner from Fernandez at Fulham, but ultimately the table doesn't lie. They finished eighth. It's the lowest position since 1990. But I think whatever happened yesterday, the players and Ten Hag were always going to be able to go over to the away end at full time, safe in the knowledge that they wouldn't have tomatoes or cabbage or fruit pelted at them. And fortunately for United yesterday, they won, so they've got some a modicum of momentum going into an FA Cup final. There's that cliche that the form book goes out the window for an FA Cup final, which in United's case would be just as well. Given that I think they ended the season with maybe was it 4 wins in their last 12 Premier League games, something like that. It was a really poor running on the league front, but they're in a pretty jovial mood after back-to-back wins, and they were pretty. As I said, it was quite jovial at Old Trafford last week after they beat Newcastle, and it was another upbeat atmosphere yesterday at Brighton. It was the first time they'd won at the Amex Stadium with their supporters present as well, which I think would have helped. And I'm sure we'll get into the vague the vagaries of the game and what have you. But it was a strange game. But those games on the final day of the season, they can be strange, when especially when there's next to nothing riding on it. And there was no jeopardy about the game at all, which probably played into United's hands in the end. And Brighton were pretty much par for the course, quite erratic, and they've had missed opportunities this season at different phases of the season. And there's a reason why they've ended up in the bottom half of the table. And so it wasn't exactly an accurate gauge of where United are at yesterday, but credit to Ten Hag with the change of Hoyland, that did change the game when they had a focal point on the pitch. And it was, I mean, strangely, Ten Hag, I think he said in his press conference afterwards, he made a mistake. He said that Hoyland, he thought, had come on after United went 1-0 up, when I think that first goal probably doesn't happen if Hoyland's not on the pitch, because the defenders, it's bad defending, but he seems unnerved by Hoyland's presence, and he doesn't deal with Casemiro's long ball, and Dallow's, who's made those runs before and threatened to score in such a manner at Luton. I remember in February, took his goal very well, and then Hoyland took his goal even better. So it was a really good week for Hoyland in particular. A good week for United, much needed good week. But there's no getting away from the league position to finished eighth, having come third last season, is a colossal failure.
Did you not look up when that ball was played over to Dallo and think, like, what's he doing there? And what a finish it
No,
was, though. It's striker's finish, wasn't it, really?
I didn't, because they did try it, as I said, a couple of times at Luton back in February, and the positions he takes up when United have the ball are adventurous. He goes into midfield a lot, and it's an unconventional run, but it's innovative, and I think that United have lacked some of that tactical flexibility this season in trying to, you know, not be as rigid as they have been at times. And Dalot is one, he's always fit. I think there are only 3 games all season that he's not started. So you're going to get a good shift from him. He has faults, as every player does, but the commitment is unquestionable there. I think I've been told a few times by fans in the away end how it winds them up a bit, how
The
ardent
fist
he is
bumps.
after they break from the lineup. And yesterday he was beating his chest, but which, I mean, even for the occasion, it felt, fair enough. He's that pumped up, but it was, as I said, it was a bit of a nothing game. But in a way, you'd rather, well, not in a way, you would rather have players with that mentality and with that approach to games and that competitive streak. And he was ardent in his celebration as well. It's strange because he's only got 3 goals this season. I say only, he's a fullback, but I think the way his sense of adventure, it's given the illusion that he's been a bit more potent in front of goal. But it's the 3 goals he's got. He has added that to his game without question. I was
So
told earlier in the
Sheffield
season,
United, Brighton, and who's
Wigan,
the? Well,
Wigan in
yeah,
the
good
FA
shout.
Cup,
Yeah,
which was it was from outside the area, wasn't it? And he curled it quite cutely into the corner. But he does stay behind after training sessions to practice on his shooting, for his distance shooting. Yesterday's goal was a bit different, but he has got it in his locker. And I mean, there were these people. I forget their names. I think there were 2 in particular, two suspects who were saying something like, they should sell him and they should give Aaron Wan-Bissaka a new contract. I think it was only a matter of months ago, and those 2 suspects have gone pretty quiet.
I'm not
One
sure
was
what you're
next
on
to me.
about,
Yes,
Samuel.
one was next to me yesterday, and the other one was in front of me yesterday. But uh, I think
Anyways, we
that
move
case
on. We
has
move on.
been well and truly that case has well and truly been put to bed. But
um,
Dallow's, he's a fullback who attacks, whereas I think he's well. I mean, him and Wan-Bissaka haven't been competitors really in recent months because they've both had to be accommodated in the same team. But unfortunately, with Wan-Bissaka, there was a TV show on BBC in the 90s and early 2000s, probably well before your time, called "Can't Cook, Won't Cook." I think with Wan-Bissaka, it's "Can't Attack, Won't Attack."
Nicely done. And Dallow's had a fantastic season. Fair play to him, and he's definitely in contention for Player of the Year, the Sir Matt Busby Player of the Year award. I think it's fair to say. Look, United rode the luck in the first half, though. Samuel, Brighton created plenty of chances, and I felt that game was quite reminiscent of the Brentford game that we went down to at the GTEC Stadium, where Brentford just created a ton of opportunities, didn't take them, and then United popped up for goal in the second half. Fair play, it was a comfortable win in the end, 2-0, happy days. And I think the away support deserved that. They were in fine voice all afternoon. They've been exceptional over the last few months, particularly, I think, on the road. The Bruno Fernandes false nine experiment, then let's talk about that, because he started for a consecutive game in that role. Rasmus Højlund was on the bench again. We had Ahmad and Alejandro Garnacho on the wings. And I thought it was quite obvious, actually, shortly after the game kicked off, that when Casemiro was getting the ball, he was getting his head up straight away and trying to play those long passes. It didn't actually work in the first half, but obviously that's where Dallow's goal came from, didn't it, in the second? But Fernandes looked a bit lost, Samuel. It worked against Newcastle last week, but it didn't work at the Amex. And he was kind of taking up these positions because he was becoming increasingly isolated, wasn't he? He was getting frustrated, and I think he was trying a little bit too hard to get into the game. And that suggested Ten Hag was considering that approach for the FA Cup final, but I would not use that now at Wembley on Saturday.
Well, I mean, Ten Hag admitted afterwards that practically that he's got 2 formations in mind. One is with Højlund, one is without Højlund. I agree with you ahead of going into the game on Saturday that, bar Luke Shaw, United have got their best players available, so they can play 10 of their strongest 11, whatever the hell that is these days. I think 3 months ago it would have included, or 2 months ago it would have included Rashford. It can't now, but who is that third forward? You've got Garnacho, Højlund. I mean, it feels a little bit premature to say Ahmad is an out-and-out first teamer for United now. He did come off early yesterday. Perhaps that was hinting at him starting in the FA Cup final. I think that would be a stretch because Amrabat came off as well. And I think maybe, in Amrabat's case, and maybe Ahmad's as well, where they started 3 games within a week, it was probably a little bit too much for them to complete another 90 minutes. And of course, in Ahmad's case, he came off against Arsenal with a minor injury. But it's still, starting 3 games within the space of a week. Those two players, certainly Ahmad, he hasn't done that. Amrabat, you're going back a number of months since he last did that. So, although in the case of course, Martinez and Fernandes coming off around the hour, that's pretty clear. I mean, that they have to start the final. Same with Kobbie Mainoo later on. But it is, there are so many different. There are quite a few different lineups that you can put on a piece of paper and say this is how United could line up on Saturday because of these recent experiments and because they played with a false nine formation at the Etihad in March, and that was enforced because Højlund was injured. He was at the Etihad that day, but I don't think his appearance fooled anyone. He was there just to support the players and the staff ahead of a big game. Martinez was also there, and he was injured. And I think really it's a question of does Ten Hag play the percentages, and that do you go with your strongest team available, which of course includes Højlund, no two ways about it, or do you try and rely on Højlund as a game changer, which he has got form for, dating back to his debut at Arsenal. When he came on, he did really well. But for Garnacho slightly straying ahead, he'd have made a huge contribution to probably a winning goal. And my goodness, how different United's season might have been had Garnacho remained on side for that goal in added time. And of course, over the past week, he's come on in both games and he's scored in both games. And logically, if a player comes on and scores, the reward is to start them. But then it's a different dynamic altogether. And Højlund would be starting against one of the most formidable teams in club football history. And you look at what City's back four will probably be, it's almost like a Mount Rushmore of back fours. It's that imposing Walker, Diaz, Vardiol, Akanji, and that's with John Stones on the bench and Nathan Ake on the bench, two defenders who would probably get into any other defence in the Premier League. So they've got 6 options there, and whoever they go with in their quartet, it is going to be a seriously imposing back four. And Højlund has lacked support at times this season. I think he's a much more mature striker since the Old Trafford derby when he bungled that one-on-one. And my gut instinct would still be to go with Højlund as the starter because he has found a bit of form. United, I think, have generally been better with a focal point this season. It's not, football isn't complicated. United's best run of form this season was when their striker was scoring goals regularly back in February, and Højlund won the Player of the Month award. So I think you have to go off that rather than the Etihad game or more recently the Newcastle game. I think the Etihad game it's a little bit misleading because Ten Hag looks upon it very, very positively. And yes, United went 1-0 up and they were 1-0 up at half time and they weren't losing until the 80th minute. But I think, was it Rich who said yesterday in that first half, Haaland missed a sitter. City had 1 or 2 other really good chances. Bar the goal, which, let's face it, it was the goal of Rashford's life. It wasn't a chance. I think United had one clear-cut chance when Rashford mishit it in the first half. There was the challenge from Edison on Garnacho in the second half, which was completely fair. It wasn't. I think Ten Hag was trying to make a lot more of it than it was at the time. He was talking about the margins. It was an opportunity, but it was well dealt with by Edison. I know you love XG. I imagine United would have been below the number 1 that day, going off what the boffins calculate on that. So I think that although it has merit, that formation, I think, and that setup, I think it is misleading. And you've got to play to your strengths. And United's strengths this season have been when they have had Højlund in the starting 11, when they have had a focal point. And yes, the game on Sunday, the second half, it almost descended into a bit of an exhibition game because Newcastle were 3-0 up at half time. I know Brentford almost clawed that back. They got it to 3-2. But at that point, Ten Hag is looking at that result. He knows United are going to finish eighth and going off his substitutions. And they made 5 changes in the second half. That second half was used as more of an exercise. It was getting players minutes. It was not treated as a serious contest. And I think some Brighton players, the way they were playing there, Brighton's not far from the beach, and some of their players had their minds on the beach. And United, with their 2 chances, were very clinical and got a merited win. But I don't think you can't go off their second half performance or their performance against Brighton and think that it should have a bearing in any way on what the cup final team will be, apart from Højlund's form. And before he scored, he was energetic. He put himself about. He had a role in that first goal just through his presence, and that's what they need. They need presence. I really think that it would be a waste to go up against City, and as brilliant as their 4 defenders are, without a focal point. And I know that there's going to be an element of surprise about Ten Hag's tactics. In 5 derbies, Fernandes has played as the number 10 only once. And it was when United got battered 6-3. He's played on the right, I think 3 times, and he's played as the false 9 on the one occasion at the Etihad. So we all know Fernandes is going to start, but I don't think he will start behind the striker. But hypothetically, what would a front 6 look like without Højlund? It would be probably, after yesterday, Casemiro, Mainu, Garnacho, McTominay behind Fernandes maybe, and then Ahmad. I think that I don't think you're playing to your strengths there, and it gives the impression that you're playing for extra time. Why would you play for extra time against Manchester City? You've just got to play your best team possible. It's an FA Cup final, and there is always the risk of overthinking these things. But I also think United will have ample attackers on the day to draw from on the bench if they need be, whether it's Rashford or, I'm not suggesting they should go to him, but he did come on and change the game in the cup quarter final against Liverpool. But Anthony is an option. Eriksen's an option. If Ahmad's on the bench, he's an option. If Harry Maguire's on the bench, he's got to be an option. If you're chasing the game and you need a goal right at the death, I'd rather. I mean, last season in the FA Cup final, they chucked on Wout Weghorst trying to get a goal. I'd much rather have Harry Maguire on trying to get a goal at the death. Launching balls into the box. So we could literally talk about and debate about what Ten Hag should do on Saturday for the rest of today. But my gut feeling is that it has to be Højlund starting because they need a focal point, and you've just got to put your best team out, and he is in United's best team.
At the start of that, I had the impression that you were quite undecided, but throughout your own answer, you've convinced yourself that Højlund must start at the weekend. I don't know if the listeners got that impression as well, Samuel, but that's the feeling I got.
No, I don't think so. I've even written a piece already this morning saying that Højlund should start. So you can check the timestamp on it. I mean, there's a lot of
hold the 2 fingers up to us.
Yeah. There's a lot.
To be fair, I'd go as strong as saying it's a must. It's a no-brainer to start Højlund on the weekend. Yeah. I mean, he scored in successive games. His confidence is up. You talk about the presence and the focal point that he gives to that team and how physical City are. And I think it's worth mentioning as well, over the last few months, he's got a lot better at creating a yard of space. We saw that against Newcastle. We saw that against Brighton, where he is so fast and he's got that raw power and pace. And he just knocks it around the defender and kind of fashions that yard, and then he can get a shot away, can't he? And as Samuel is just, as I've just said that, Samuel's just submitted his Højlund story, presumably. I've got a notification through on my phone.
Yeah.
Is that the Højlund piece?
Notify, before I came on here. But yeah, thank you for reminding me anyway.
We'll leave it there for part 1, and we'll be back in a moment for part 2. Welcome back to part two of the Manchester is Red podcast. Now, Samuel, I want to praise Casemiro again. We did it after his performance against Newcastle, but I thought he was really good against Brighton. Obviously, the goal line clearance, Lissandro Martinez made one as well, but his passing, I thought, really stood out. As I said in the first part, he was really on the ball, getting his head up and knocking it around, and I've been quite critical of his passing. I think I said after the Arsenal game, you can't even do a 10-yard pass these days, but no, it was completely different on Sunday afternoon. He was obviously played at centre back, but looking ahead to the FA Cup final, it's probably wise to move him back into midfield, isn't it, with a view to the weekend?
Yeah, he shouldn't be playing at centre back in the final. And United had four centre backs in their squad yesterday. Varane got minutes. Evans came on, but he's been starting a lot recently anyway. Martinez came through the game unscathed. They've got Willy Camboala in reserve. Victor Lindelof is back in training. Harry Maguire might make the match day squad for the final. So I think it would be absolutely ridiculous to play Casemiro at centre back just because he's played the past 6 or 7 games there. He's done okay at times. The Sheffield United home game, I think Ten Hag was asked about it in his interview afterwards with one of the rights holders. I didn't think that talking about Casemiro doing well against one of the worst teams in the top flight that we've ever seen was particularly topical, a particularly topical matter at that time. But his passing last season was consistently excellent, and I think that was one of the most impressive things about his first season. That for a defensive-minded player, he was one of United's best attackers because of his passing range, and he did get a few really important goals. And you expect a midfielder who's come from Real Madrid and been as central to their success as he has to be really good on the ball, and he can be, and he showed that yesterday. There's an element of good fortune with the goal because the ball should have been cut out. It was dismal defending, but he's got that in his locker, and I think what probably helped. Ten Hag won't admit it, whether he thinks so or not, I don't know. But Amrabat had a really poor game yesterday, having had 2 good games, and that makes Ten Hag's decision infinitely easier now, especially with centre backs available. It's Casemiro goes back in midfield, and then it's a case of deciding which defender goes next to Martinez. It logically has to be Varane or Evans because they're more current. I mean, I think Lindelof is out of the reckoning altogether. He might be on the bench, but he's not played since Brentford away. I think, wasn't it? He came off
Yeah, that's correct.
at half time in that game. So you're going all the way back to March with that. So I don't think you can even. I just don't think it even comes into consideration. It'll have been 8 weeks since he last played. Come the cup final, I think. And Maguire is definitely someone that you'd want on the bench. I think in the case of Lindelof, it's probable that he's played his last game for United because given
See, you
the
keep saying
amount of
that, but
players.
I keep arguing Lindelof's just a great survivor. He will keep on surviving. He's
They
some
have
shows
to
to win.
sell
You
him.
think he should go? Yeah, I agree,
They,
but I think he'll stay. I think he will.
there's no sense to it. Like, they're not going to get a huge fee for him, but they need to make money off player sales, and they will be selling a lot of players. They need to sell a lot of players this summer, and you just look at the players who are out of contract next year, and it's a no brainer. You can't you can't tolerate having them in the building beyond the end of the summer transfer window. He's had a very good run, Lindelof, of 7 years, but I would it would be a failing of the new regime if he was somehow at United when the transfer window closes in August or September, whenever the official date is. But I don't think he'll even get on the bench for the final unless Maguire's deemed not fit enough, unless he fails a fitness test. But Maguire hasn't trained yet, and no, he was never going to play again in these remaining league games. That was confirmed at the time that United announced that he'd suffered an injury. But as I said earlier, whether it's a defensive capacity or an attacking capacity, he's a good asset to have on the bench. It's a pity for him that he won't start Maguire because up until he did get injured a couple of weeks ago, he was a certainty to start the FA Cup final. It was shaping up to be Maguire and Martinez, but he's he's possibly lost his place with that ill-timed injury, and it's I'd still go with Varane just because of the connection he has with Martinez and the form that they showed last season. And I know you are going on you're judging players on what they did last season, which can be quite perilous, but it's a one-off occasion, and I think characters of Varane's ilk and Casemiro's ilk, you need them in this final, and you need them in their best positions. And let's face it, it's going to be Varane's final game in a United shirt. It should be Casemiro's final game in a United shirt. That they're not going to want to go out on a bum note, and they've done it before. They've played in God knows how many finals between them. You absolutely need those two players on the pitch in their best positions.
Yeah, so if Lindelof does go, someone who is a certainty to join him through the exit door, Sofian Amrabat. He's only on loan. Return to sender, back to Fiorentina. Look, we've been giving him his flowers, really, haven't we, over the last week or so, because he has been quite good and he brought balance to the midfield. But I thought his performance against Brighton was a regression to the player who we kind of suspected that he was through large parts of this season, the kind of player who will not be signed by United this summer, who probably isn't up to the level. I think, I don't want to sound too harsh, but he looked like he was running through treacle sometimes. He just looked knackered. He looked really slow and lethargic. And he brought down a Brighton player just after 20 minutes, got a yellow card. And interestingly, Samuel, I was discussing this with Rich in the car on the way home, because we were discussing Manu as well. And I thought Manu actually had quite a good game. Brighton dominated possession and had a lot of the ball, but in the bits when Manu had it, I think he used it very well. A few flicks around the corner, a few lovely passes. And I thought to myself, when Amrabat got that yellow card in the first half, then Manu attracted a yellow card for a Brighton player in the second half. And I thought that's the difference between Amrabat and Manu. Amrabat makes those kind of fouls and Manu wins them. And he's 8 years younger. So I think Manu's just had a brilliant season. I think yesterday was always bound to be difficult because Brighton are just masters in possession and they keep the ball very, very well. And that was evident in the first half. But I thought when he had the ball, I thought he used it very well. And he was actually quite good.
I mean, you've jogged my memory because there were a couple of occasions where he did have nice flicks and he kind of quickened some attacks, but I thought he was pretty quiet again. I mean, the first half, United were just poor. They were fortunate to be level at half time. I don't think it was quite to the level of Brentford. I'm not sure anything will ever reach the level of Brentford and their 300 shots or whatever it was at the United goal and hitting the woodwork God knows how many
See, I
times.
thought it was quite similar. I thought it was quite similar to that game.
I mean, the
Brighton did
Brentford
create a
game
lot of
felt like
chances.
they were. The Brentford game felt like United were just under siege. It was something like from the Alamo. Whereas yesterday, because it was the last game of the season, it was just there was an element of Brighton coasting a bit, and they weren't particularly intense. And I actually thought, certainly when Casemiro cleared the shot off the line from João Pedro, I just thought, well, I think United are going to nick this because Brighton seem to have expended all their energy, and they're lacking a bit of edge here. Whereas United certainly had more of an edge with Højlund on the pitch and were sharper up top as well, and took both goals very well. I mean, Mainu has had a brilliant season, no two ways about it. He has had. There's been a bit of a lull, I'd say, since he got into the England squad, and that can naturally happen with a young player, and you just have to support them as best you can. And I think United have done. He and Garnacho have been overplayed this season. They've had extraordinary amount of football. I think Mainu's the last time he didn't start a game was against Forest in the FA Cup, and I think most of us thought at the time, well, that's quite a risk, that, especially given what happened at the City Ground in the league game when he was substituted at half time, and then Forest scored those two goals from the void, which was supposed to be United's midfield. And I'm not sure when he last didn't start a game before then, because he's been a never present, and that was why I was slightly not surprised such, but I thought it was maybe a bit ill advised, even though he did reasonably well yesterday. But Garnacho starting again and playing the full 90 minutes, I thought was crazy. I thought if anyone needs a rest, it's him. Ahead of an FA Cup final that he will absolutely start in. He has to start. That would be a shock if he was to somehow not start that game. but is it 37 successive starts for
Yeah,
him
I was just
now?
about to say so it's 37 successive starts now, and when I was looking at those,
That's
the
crazy for a
you,
19-year-old at that
yeah,
level.
I mean the press box at Brighton obviously it's right next to the bench, isn't it? So you kind of look up and seeing who's coming on, and when those players were kind of raising to their feet, I was thinking, is someone going to come on for Garnacho? Is he going to get a break? But he was denied a rest, and he played the full game, didn't he? His body's been pushed to the limit, and fair play because he's 19 years old, and he's just kept on going to the well this season, hasn't
He has, and look at Bournemouth. Of course, he was taken off at half time, and that was a tactical substitution, wasn't it? And he had his hissy fit afterwards, which Ten Hag dealt with swiftly as he should have done. You can't tolerate that behaviour, whether they're a young player or a senior player. But to have avoided injury in the position he plays in as well is pretty staggering. He's a target for hatchet men, as any very good winger or up and coming winger would be. And because that he's not had that support network, or United have been devoid of senior wingers who can shoulder responsibility as well as Garnacho can, that's why he's kept on playing. And you look across those 37 starts, I don't blame Ten Hag. I'd have played him in almost all of them. I wouldn't have started him on Sunday, but he has been one of United's best players this season. I think up until maybe March, he seemed a shoe in for the Sir Matt Busby Player of the Year award. It's a bit more of an open field now. I don't think Diogo Dalot has necessarily been as I think you said he was fantastic earlier. I wouldn't quite go that far with him. I think he's had a decent, solid season. I think Fernandez
he?
has been very
I'd say
good.
Dallo, Fernandez, Garnacho, and Mane were the four for me
Yeah, they've
in
been the top
contention
four
for the award.
performers.
Yeah.
Yeah, they have been the top four performers. I think Hoyland's had a respectable season. I mean, in the end, I know the season's not over as well, but 16 goals is a really good return given his starting point. But I think most of us, it was actually literally said when we were on tour in San Diego. I think one of us said, if Hoyland gets 15 goals, that's really good going for him. But is it going to be good enough for United? No. Uh, I think a lot of us foresaw the problems with signing a striker of Hoyland's profile and having a striker of Marshall's profile, whatever that profile is these days, as as the support. And that's why it's a credit to Hoyland, Mainu, and Garnacho in particular that they've shouldered a really onerous burden this season, and they've done very well on an individual basis. They've made invaluable contributions to United's season uh, in the FA Cup and to a lesser extent in the Premier League, because in the end they finished the season in eighth. But that's not a slight on them whatsoever. It's the senior players who should have been done better and should have been helping them out more, and they've not done that anywhere near often enough. There've only been a handful who have who've excelled, and as we just discussed, it's mainly Dallo and Fernandez.
We've just started talking about Garnacho there. We'll go to the other wing on the right. Ahmad started for a third consecutive game. I think it's unfair to say that he didn't take his chance for the FA Cup final, because I think that just the attack was just blunted in that first 50 minutes, 55 minutes until the changes. It just wasn't working, was it, with Fernandez as the false nine? Do you think Ahmed will start in the final on Saturday on the back of that performance? Because a bit of an indifferent display, I think it's fair to say.
I mean, I thought he was okay. I think he had some nice interplay. He'll be disappointed when he cut inside in the second half, and he had that shot that went well over, and we've seen him do that for Sunderland. It's ended up in the back of the net, and I suspect he came off because it's the workload of three starts within the space of a week. As I said, similarly with Amrabat, I, I think given it's an FA Cup final against Manchester City, it would be pretty bold of Ten Hag to keep Ahmad in the starting 11. He absolutely has to be and will be in the matchday squad, but I can still see it maybe being Fernandez off the right, um, with maybe McTominay playing behind Hoyland. I don't necessarily agree with that, but I think just playing Ahmad on the right and with Hoyland or without Hoyland, I don't think that would be the right way to go about it. And maybe Ten Hag will have changed his mind tomorrow, and then he'll change his mind again on Wednesday. But you hope for United's sake that I think it's in United's interest to actually have it established now in Ten Hag's mind what the team will be. I remember I spoke to a manager a few years ago who said about, in terms of how long does it take to, when do you pick your team for a game? Do you leave it to like the day before, what have you? And he said that in the weeks where there's not a midweek game, you pretty much know the team on the Monday, and then you can drill that team to within an inch of its life ahead of the game on the Saturday or the Sunday. And I know there's a risk of team news leaking, but I think if you're a manager, you've just got to trust your players and trust that they be sensible with with the occasion and with what's at stake. And it's very rare that a team for a cup final leaks 4 or 5 days before the final. I don't think that's going to happen. But I do think it's in United's interest that they know their team from the outset. As early as today, we're speaking on Monday, so that's 5 days before the final. So I think that would be the right way to go about it, just to have that certainty. And they'll be having a recovery day today anyway, so it won't be a proper training session. So, but if you're Ten Hag, who will clearly be strategizing for Saturday now, even if he doesn't tell the players today, I think he needs to know today. I think
Well,
you're
Ten
coming
Hag
up
was asked
against
that,
a
wasn't he?
formidable team.
In his
Yeah.
press conference, I think, was it Chris Wheeler who asked the question? He said, "Do you know your team for the cup final now? May I ask?" It's a difficult one. Does he have it in his head? I'm not sure. Would I start Ahmed? I think I would. I like having a bit of momentum behind the player and 4 starts. We'll have to see at the weekend. I'm sure we'll discuss that a bit more later on in the week.
The problem
We'll do
you've
another
also
podcast
got,
anyways.
the problem you've got there as well is that you have to pick a team considering what City are going to be doing. And City will have no doubt Vardiol at left back, and he's a left back who is becoming who's playing like an attacker at the moment. So you will need someone to keep tabs on him.
Yeah, which is incredible considering he's a centre half. He's been popping up with some crazy goals, hasn't he? Really.
The goal he took the first one at Fulham, it was just like the most fluent forward that you could ever see. The way he took that goal I personally would not entrust Ahmad with going up against a player of that profile. I think you need someone a bit more disciplined, someone with a lot more experience. And Ahmad he could be a big game changer. They have to play the percentages. I mean, Ten Hag, we saw at Wembley in the semi-final, his bench was a bunch of work experience kids, a couple of players that he didn't fancy at the time. And Ahmad was one of them, ironically, and 2 players he'd signed. After he'd made those first 2 changes, he was pretty much out of substitutions in terms of substitutions he would want to make. He was having to bring Ahmad on. He was having to bring Amari Forson on. Fortunately, he's had a rethink with Ahmad and shown a lot more appreciation for him of late and given him more exposure, which is what he should have been doing months ago. But that's by the by.
In terms of what the result means, it's the end of the season now. 60 points, no Europe. If obviously United win the FA Cup, they will go into the Europa League. United finished level with Newcastle on points, but obviously finished below them on goal difference because Newcastle had a way better goal difference. That's why I said it was a joyless season really at the start, Samuel, because there have been moments, of course, there have been a few games that you could look back on with a degree of fondness, but as a body of work, you look at the Premier League table, when it's all said and done, for Manchester United to be in 8th, that's just not good enough. It's unacceptable, that. I know there's been an injury crisis, and we've covered it chapter and verse on the podcast, but when you look at the table, it's just not good.
It's inexcusable. The injuries, of course, have contributed, and there is the mitigation of that. I'd say, in particular, the case of Martinez and Shaw, that's compromised United in particular, and of course, defenders have dropped like flies, and there's a reason why they've had to play with Casemiro at centre half since the Coventry game. But up top, they've not really been crippled by injuries too much, and they've had a fair few midfielders to choose from, and I think we've discussed at length that as ramshackle as the back four has looked at times, it's not had any protection, and the options have been there. Amrabat's been fit for pretty much since he came back from AFCON, but until the Arsenal game, he wasn't getting a look in, and perhaps he should have more often, just to shield that back four, to protect them, because you never knew what you were going to get from United one game to the next. And look, Jamie Carragher did a pretty lacerating analysis of them earlier in the season about how they press high, but they defend deep, and it just creates an absolute chasm that teams have exploited, and that would account for the 19 defeats they've suffered this season. And you look at that squad; it's imperfect. I never thought it was going to be title challenging material, but having finished third last season, you want to climb up the table. So if you're going to get second, you think, well, if we're going to get second, we need to be a title challenge in second, and that had to be the aspiration, and that went up in smoke, you know, almost as soon as the season started. And you can talk about the injuries, but some of those injuries have been caused by training sessions that have been too intense. Players have spoken about this privately, and you can sign players who are more robust. I mean, Ten Hag used the word robust to describe Mason Mount to me the other week, and I couldn't tell initially whether it was a parody or something, because if there's one player who's not been robust, it's him. He's a player I just don't think United should ever have signed. A midfield mismatch with Casemiro, and he's been their worst number 7 since Michael Owen, which is really saying something. I mean, that curse, they just cannot lift it. And
I've got hope. I mean, it's probably foolish at this stage to still have hope that Mason Mount will come good, but I mean, the season's just been
I think
disrupted by
it's
these
almost as if you're
injuries.
just basing that on what he did at Chelsea, and what he did at Chelsea
Yeah, it is.
was a long
It
time
has to be
ago.
though, doesn't it? It has to be based on that. You can't base it on anything else. He's not shown. I mean, you can't base
But
that on that
I don't
cameo
look.
performance against Brentford, can you?
He is a good footballer. He's got good footballing intelligence. There's a reason why Thomas Tuchel really loved him. There's a reason why Frank Lampard gave him that platform at Chelsea as well, and why Gareth Southgate always had him in his England team up until about 18 months ago. But sometimes a player is suited to a specific club or a specific team or a specific manager. And I don't think Mount was. I never looked at Mason Mount and thought he's a Man United player in waiting. And there's a reason why Man United signed him, and it's because of a lack of ambition. It's because he entered the last year of his contract, and it's because he wasn't going to cost as much as Declan Rice or Jude Bellingham or Harry Kane. It's an absolute travesty that United, purportedly the biggest club in England, elected not to sign any of England's 3 best players last summer: Kane, Rice, Bellingham. You could take Foden out of the equation. I mean, Foden would be in the top 3, but unattainable. But those 3 were on the market, and United had interest, or the players were interested in United at one point or another, and they didn't sign any of them. And who did they sign? They signed the guy who was coming towards the end of his contract, thinking it'd be cut price. And in the end, they have literally wasted £55 million on the player just to sign him a year before his contract expired, and to finance his medical bills. And
Yeah, I mean, when you look at it like that,
when you
your
consider
comments,
when
yeah,
you consider Mount's contract length as well, he's got 4 years left on it. He's going to have to be absolutely exceptional to be a success at Man United now. You think of United's starting point going into next season, what would constitute success, and how gradual it's going to have to be to try and get back to the top again. And look, it helps that Klopp is going. It would help if Guardiola goes next year, which he could do. So there is an opportunity there, but he's going to have to perform like an absolute demon to become a successful player at United and to be considered a success. I never looked at Mason Mount and thought, yeah, they should sign him. Never. Rice, yes. Bellingham, yes. Okay, with Bellingham, wasn't going to happen. Kane, absolutely. Onana, I completely understood United making that signing completely. I don't. He's not had a good season. He's let in far too many savable shots, but they had to call time on David De Gea's career, and I think Onana will be better next season. But I never ever thought Mason Mount was Man United material, and I think giving him the number 7 as well, it might seem a moot point, but it does create a different kind of hype around a player and a different level of expectation. And sometimes the player can't shoulder that expectation, and he's broken down about 4 or 5 times this season.
I agree. I don't think he should have been signed, but he's here now, isn't he? So I think going into next season, I think the key thing is he needs a defined role, because I think when you get not messed around, but he's not got a clear position. Does he was brought to the club to play in a deeper midfield role? Can he actually play there? Can he excel there? His best position on evidence is number 10. He's not going to play there because Fernandes plays there. Can he play on the right?
Unless
He did for
Fernandes
Chelsea a
leaves.
bit. Yeah, that's very true. That could happen this summer. I hope not. Um, so that's going to be really interesting with Mason Mount going forward. I like to think he'll come good, but I think that really is key to getting the best out of him. And if we go into next season and there is that kind of uncertainty about where he's going to play, then I think he's just destined to fail. And I actually made the point a couple of months into his time at the club, and I said this could be Donny van de Beek 2.0. A similar kind of profile coming in that position, and then didn't really have a defined role. So yeah, not good at all. We'll leave it there for part 2. We'll be back in a moment for part 3. We'll try go a bit faster, Samuel. We're 45 minutes in, so we'll try
No.
whiz through this last segment of the podcast. We don't
I
want to
think
bore
we're
people too
delirious
much.
after another long journey.
Well, the sun was out, wasn't it? We didn't have any sun cream, but no, it was a lovely day on the south coast. Do you know, when I think back on my time covering United, you've done it for a lot longer than me. I joined the MEN in March 21, I think it was. And I look back at that season 21-22 when Solskjaer was sacked and replaced by Ralph Rangnick. And I just remember saying to my friend, obviously it was a bleak campaign. It really was pretty depressing. And by the end of it, we're objective, we cover it as journalists like that. But even I started to think, God, this is depressing by the end of the season. I thought it was just so miserable. There was no positivity covering it. And it was just pretty grim. You could compare that season to this one, Samuel. The big difference is United are in an FA Cup final this season. So for that reason, it's probably not as dark as that one. But can you see similarities in the way they've developed, especially since you look back in May 2022 when there was that game at the Amex Stadium, wasn't it, when United went and got hammered 4-0. So at least there wasn't a repeat of that 2 years later down on the south coast.
No, that was the nadir of that season, and then they trumped it about 3 months later at Brentford under a completely different manager. So United, I think what we've discovered covering them is that they are the club that anything that can go wrong will go wrong, and that's been the case this season. None of us on the preseason tour expected them to spiral like this. I think most people would have had them in their top 4 in terms of predictions at the start of the season. I certainly would have. When you look at the competitors, Chelsea were a basket case. Villa would have been dark horses at best. Did really well just to qualify for the Europa Conference League last season. I think it is still last season, isn't it? We're in that grey area now of what is last season. But and Tottenham with a new coach coming in, I didn't really see them as a threat. I think that 5th would have been good going for them, and they've ended in the top 5. I think Postecoglou has done a good job there. So if someone had told me back in August United will finish 8th this season, I'd probably laughed at them or suggested that they might need to be committed. But they have finished 8th, and these are reasons why change is needed in the summer. Emery came into Villa after Ten Hag at United. Postecoglou came into Tottenham after Ten Hag at United, and for better or for worse, their teams play the way they want them to. We don't know what we're going to get from United from one week to another, and ahead of their biggest game of the season, the manager is considering keeping essentially their only striker on the bench, because United don't have an identity and they don't have a set style, and they are still doing. I see them as kind of like a more sophisticated version of Solskjaer's team, in that Solskjaer used to do that. It'd be like, oh, we're playing a big team this week, so we're going to a back three. Uh, just adjusting for depending on the caliber of opposition, and sometimes it quite often worked for Solskjaer, but towards the end it certainly wasn't working. I remember after his last home game in charge against City, they started with a back three, and at half time they changed formation. It was back four, and that was the day that United. This is kind of like is United post Ferguson. Really, United had more attempts on target at their own goal that day than they did at City's goal, and it was the day that Pep Guardiola said, was asked, "Are you disappointed you only won 2-0?" He said, "No, it's okay. It's okay." It was like Ole in, really. And of course, he stayed in for another 2 weeks and they got thumped 4-1 at Watford. But even Michael Owen, after that game, Michael Owen was lambasting Solskjaer's tactics in a very erudite way. Like, you can't, if you're Man United manager, you can't say, oh, we're playing this big team this week, so we're going to be ultra defensive, and next week we'll change back to that. You've got to have a set style. And they don't have that now. They have regressed to that extent. And some would say worse, because they've finished eighth. This is the lowest position they've ended a league season in since 1990. They ended the season on a minus goal difference as well. They lost, 14 league games. That is, as the cliche goes, the league is your bread and butter. That is the reliable gauge of where a team is at. And it doesn't lie. They completely deserve to have finished eighth. The teams above them have all been better than them. Newcastle went on a really good charge towards the end of the season, and completely merited coming in seventh. And they're a different team in terms of identity, understandably to Villa and Tottenham. And Eddie Howe has been there for 2.5 years now, but he's done a terrific job to finishing fourth and then finishing seventh in his 2 full seasons, and they've had injuries to contend with, and that's another thing that we always hear it from Ten Hag every bloody press conference. He keeps on going on about the injuries. Yes, well, Liverpool won a cup final with a depleted squad. They had 6 or 7 first teamers that you could argue out of that game. City coped without Kevin De Bruyne for 4 months. Erling Haaland was absent for the best part of 2 months during that period. That's probably the most devastating combination in football. And City have won the title, and they're going for a second consecutive domestic double. With United, whenever they suffered one key injury, or maybe 2 or 3 key injuries at the most, they just fell to pieces. And they had a bit of momentum in February, and the one injury they couldn't afford was Højlund because of the form he was in. And of course, it was Højlund who got injured. The next day, they lost to Fulham, and that day that was it. They were done for, I think, as far as finishing in the top 4 was concerned. And we've discussed all this already before, but there has to be a change in the summer. I've stuck my head above the parapet on that. I did that a few weeks ago, and nothing has changed my mind. And look, that decision this time next week, the fans need to know about it. We need to know about it, what they're doing, because they can't beat about the bush on that. Time is of the essence. They need to prepare for a summer transfer window. They need to be decisive. The new power brokers need to prove to us that they are fit to run the football club as well. They've talked a very good game, and they've made they've been statements of statement of intent. Sorry, a signal of intent with Omar Barada coming in as chief executive for Manchester City, headhunting Dan Ashworth, Jason Wilcox. It remains to be. I'm still yet to, and anyone is yet to be given compelling evidence why someone who occupied a junior role at Manchester City in their academy and then was a director of football at a championship club is part of the brains trust that know the solutions to all of Manchester United's ills. These people need to justify their existence to us, and their credibility is at stake as well. That there's that they're effectively on trial in a way, even though it's not quite as clear cut as that. But I mean, as I said earlier, the season has ended for a lot of people, but for United, I think it almost feels like it will never end. I mean, there's going to be so much to write about United after the cup final. Fortunately, I go on holiday on June the 3rd, but I suspect United will be the big story probably up until conveniently the European Championship starts, and then people can maybe switch off somewhat and enjoy the tournament.
My holiday's a bit later in June. I think it's 23rd of June I go away. So I think you're right. It's going to be a quite intense few weeks. There's a managerial change in the offing, and there is going to be changes to the playing squad. I look back at that squad that was at Brighton, actually, Samuel, when they got hammered 4-0 in May 2022. And I was surprised it was just actually four players who departed that summer after that game. Mata, Matic, Cavani, and Lingard. When you look at the squad now, how many players do you think in the squad from yesterday will leave in the summer? You look at the starting team. Amrabat obviously goes back. He's a loanee. Casemiro, Wan-Bissaka, Eriksen, Varane's obviously confirmed, and Johnny Evans. So that's six, isn't it? I think, and maybe even Rashford, to be fair.
Yeah, I mean, I think Evans they can be flexible with, as I've said before, in that given his age and given the games he's played this season, you would hope for his if he was to stay that he wouldn't play as many games next season, because if he is playing as many games as he has this season, then it tells you there's another injury crisis. But he was signed as someone who would probably get about 15 games all season, and he must have played close to 30 games, I'd have thought, in terms of starts and substitute appearances. Maybe I'm a little bit off with the specific number there. No, he's played 33 games this season. That does include some games. I think it includes, is it only 2 games for Northern Ireland? So yeah, he's played over 30 times for United this season, which is quite incredible for someone who was signed on a whim almost, and as an injury insurance defender, if you like. But we've been through it all. I mean, a lot of players need to go. I think we've all done our keep or sells or releases for the summer, and there needs to be upheaval. There just need to be substantial changes. I think when you go back to a couple of years ago when Chelsea were taken over by Clearlake, and of course they made a lot of structural changes there, and long-serving personnel went and new personnel came in at hierarchical level. And that season they reached the two cup finals, 2 domestic cup finals. They won the Club World Cup, and they only lost those 2 domestic cup finals on penalties. And they finished in the top 4, so it was pretty good going. And then they still sacked the manager in September. With United, who are in a similar position where they've had not a takeover, but they've got new owners, new people running the show. They've got new people in the structure. Changing manager compared to the position Chelsea were in is, if you were to assess it on paper, it just looks like a no-brainer. You have God knows how many excuses to change manager based on the evidence of this season, whereas Tuchel had actually navigated a pretty tricky run-in and a lot of uncertainty over Chelsea's future very, very well in steering them to Champions League qualification, getting them to, as I said, the League Cup final and the FA Cup final against a Liverpool side that hadn't lost a game that calendar year until the Champions League final. It would have been against Real Madrid. And Tuchel still got sacked early into the next season. So, it's... I know it will be. It's not nice having to make those decisions, but you've got to do what's best for the football club, and I've been of the opinion for a while that there just logically has to be a managerial change. Eric Ten Hag has not been a bad manager for United. He was really good for them last season, and I wrote that and said that at the time. But this season, the sheer spiral and the new low they've plumbed to, certainly in the Premier League era, and some other records that have tumbled, you can't just blame that on injuries and talking about a team in transition. I mean, they've been saying this about United for, it feels like, 10 years. The manager's been there for 2 years. You can't talk about a team in transition 2 years in. That's inexcusable.
Table doesn't lie, as you said before. We've recorded this podcast for an hour now, Samuel, and we've got a meeting in the office, which we love meetings in the office, don't we? That's just fantastic. So we'll leave it there. Thanks for your time.
A recruitment meeting, maybe.
And thanks to the listeners as usual. Have a great week. We'll be back with you probably on Wednesday and Friday ahead of the FA Cup final. So take care and we'll speak soon. Take care.